It's time for Shotgun Saturday night. It's time to talk about bare knuckle boxing. Oh, I hope you're ready. I hope you're ready for some Shotgun Saturday night, ladies and gentlemen. Episode 9. It's Saturday. You know it. I know it. And if you don't know it, well, I'll explain it. Shotgun Saturday Night, ladies and gentlemen, Episode 9. If you don't know the series, Shotgun is actually a series known as Bare Knuckle Boxing, where instead of talking about professional boxing on this channel, I talk about bare knuckle boxing. And to take care of everyone's throat today, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to be a humdinger. But here's the thing, guys. So, ladies and gentlemen, in history, ladies and gentlemen, with all events, all professional sports around the world, this will bring us to a huge understanding of what we're here to talk about. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as we try to get to it, guys, next week, I will be doing, which is episode 10, we'll be talking about the history of John L. Sullivan. You see, John L. Sullivan is mostly the final ever bare knuckle champion in the world of professional bare knuckle boxing. Now, guys, as said before, guys, the old days of bare knuckle boxing were simple. Because, guys, I have said this in the first episodes. I have said it that bare knuckle boxing, which is also known as a classical pugilism, fisticuffs, fist fight, and it was illegal boxing, and prize fighting. And there were some illegal prize fighting at the time. I have said this before, they used to box in hay barrels, other areas like square hays, and even before during the 20th century and now and during the 21st century, before the American bare knuckle came back to make their own major division, people were fighting in bars and clubs, and back then were similarity. But yeah. So, guys, next week I will be talking about John L. Sullivan and what he done, what his career was. I'll be going through his history book and knowing what he done. Now, guys, I have made a top 5 list of the greatest boxers in New England, and I did put him barely at the top 5 because of it. And the reason I did that was because it was simple. Back in the day, he used to fight against fighters that were their debut. He goes to the bar and you can say everything. Like, because guys, going to bars and clubs were the thing back in the 1800s were. And John did point it out that he can lick any son of a bee in the world. And he did. But in all fairness, I wouldn't really say there was much to it than experience because taking on people that haven't had one fight in their career is like being a hype job. And that's what John L. Sullivan was. Which was also the reason why I did not put him much in the top 5. Was he better than fighters like Willie Pep or Rocky Marciano or even Marvin Hagler? In my mind, I just don't see that being the case. I just don't see it. So, but you know what? You look back at it, I say to myself, well, what difference does it make? Like, what difference does it make at this moment? Because at this moment, the real history has just begun. Which is why, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to talk about the bare knuckle boxers of boxing. And ladies and gentlemen, there is one person I have talked about. Now, guys, I have talked about John Jack Broughton. I have talked about a little bit of some of his work and his career. And I've talked about this like some weeks ago when I had talked about his career and his fighting and what he's actually improved in the world of sports and what he's done. Talk about how he created the sport in the 1740s and 1730s. And back then, guys, boxing was just surprising. Like, bare knuckle fighting was just so on point. But then, guys, you have other champions like Elizabeth Wilkinson, who was an English bare knuckle boxer. And you want to know something? Elizabeth Wilkinson, ladies and gentlemen, is the episode I'll talk about. Because, ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about the greatest boxers in the world, we always talk about men, gentlemen, that have wax on their mustache, but they still have an ironclad to put their fisticuffs into battle. They put themselves right into the middle of it to fight against the greatest. And there's going to be one boxer I'm going to talk about in next week, which we'll talk about John L. Sullivan. Not just his mustache, but another fighter he fought in 1882. And like I said before, guys, I have talked about this, but not much. But when it comes to females, ladies and gentlemen, females are so different around the world that you find a lot of interesting stuff. And in 1772 to probably 1733, if my information is right, on Wikipedia, we have the word of Elizabeth Wilkinson from the Floruit. Floruit denotes the date and period during which a person was known to have been alive or active. And it says that she was born maybe in 1722 and gone in 1733. Alternately referred as Elizabeth Stokes. So who is Elizabeth Stokes? Well, technically, do I have to tell you? Elizabeth Stokes, ladies and gentlemen, was an English bare knuckle boxer and practitioner of historical European weapon arts, active in the 1720s and early 1730s. She is one of the earliest known female boxers. During her decade-long career, she was often described as a championess, which is another word for a champion or a victor. It stated right here that described as a championess and had a reputation for having fought 45 bouts without defeat. Although no official career data survives from the time, later in her career she engaged in bouts in which she and her husband, who was also a boxer, fought against other mixed gender couples. In the 1700s, we had mixed gender couples bare knuckling each other. Guys, this is a woman in the 1700s during the 16th century. Guys, this is the 16th century, and this is the first ever female boxer in history. This was during the early of the bare knuckle era. And this is what makes it crazy. So yes, she engaged bouts in which she and her husband fought against other mixed gender couples. She was also skilled with daggers and short swords and quarterstaffs. She was one of the most famous prize fighters in her time. And writers including Pierce Egan and Thomas More celebrated her career into the early 19th century. Now, I actually made a mistake here. I didn't say 6th. I meant to say 18th century, ladies and gentlemen. I meant to say that. So this is the 18th century we're talking about. 1700s to 17. So guys, like I said before, guys, we don't know when she lived. She must have lived a good life or something. But guys, her decade-long career from 1722 to 1733, has a lot of history to be talked about. And if people did found information about her in the 1700s and even during the 1800s of the 19th century with Pierce Egan and Thomas More, who were an Irish and British journalist and Irish writer, does make you wonder. Now, her personal life does have little information survives about her life outside of the boxing ring, and in an announcement of promoting one of her matches, she claimed to be of the famous city of London. Like most English boxers in the 18th century, she appeared to have come from a working class English background. L.A. Jennings speculated that she may have been related to the boxer Robert Wilkinson, who was hanged for murder on September the 24th, 1722. So that's the first reported information that we know of her during the start of her life. Shortly after Elizabeth's first advertised boxing match, while Christopher speculated that Wilkinson might not have been her real surname and that she may have chosen it as a stage name to evoke the particularly infamous fellow boxer, because she did marry James Stokes in 1725. Keep that in mind, guys. And I can't understand a lot of information of who James Stokes is, other than there's not a lot of information to talk about, other than we have a Thrasher 2012 and a Radford 2016 page articles on Wikipedia. But yet again, take this for what you will, because with everything going on, I really can't even say much about this. But in 1725, a 1725 promotional announcement for a fight described her as his much admired consort. Sometimes between 1722 to 1726, she became known as Elizabeth Stokes. After her last documented fight was in 1733, with no further information about her life can be found in the historical record, does make you wonder, do we know more about these people in the past than we should? Because, guys, it even says here, like in June of 1722, she challenged a woman named Hannah Highfield from Newgate Market in London to what may have been one of the earliest advertised female prize fights in London. Her challenge in London, in a London newspaper, declared, "I, Elizabeth Wilkinson of Clerkenwell, have had some words with Hannah Highfield, and requiring satisfaction, do invite her to meet her on stage and box with me for 3 guineas. Wait. Box with me for 3 guineas, which is actually a coin minted in Great Britain. Huh. Interesting. So they were boxing for 3 of these coins. Huh. They went to specify on each woman would grasp a half-crown in each hand, a rule that prevented the gouging and scratching common in 18th century boxing. That year, she had fought a fishwife named Martha Jones, whom she reportedly beat after 22 minutes. So, guys, it's kind of weird that we don't know this history as much. But, guys, I think we have to understand the first ever... I don't know how to explain it. This is actually ridiculous to understand this. Because, guys, like I said before, this is... I don't know what to say about this. Guys, boxing matches were always bare knuckle in the 18th century, which they were. And the 19th century as well, until during the part of the 1880s when things started changing. In the 1890s, by the last decade of the 19th century, it changed, and pro boxing with gloves became a thing by the final years of that decade. And, well, the 20th century and the start of the 21st century were all professional boxing. Until now, bare knuckle boxing is back, but yet, taking on a fishwife? Sheesh. Like, bouts sometimes continued without pause until one competitor collapsed. And guys, I actually talked about that last week in my last episodes, talking about how back then boxing was not meant for rounds. There were no rounds, no time limits, nothing. Only the fighter that collapses or gives up is the victor. And that's what they did here. So Wilkinson was skilled with everything here. And as I said before, she was skilled with those weapons I talked about. And the majority of her matches may have been fought with weapons, because it is possible that some of these matches were fought with weapons, if that's kind of shocking enough. Like, guys, can you imagine in the 18th century, you go to London, you see women fighting each other? Guys, can you viewers imagine if someone made a movie about bare knuckle boxing and they talk about this woman, but we don't know a lot of the information about her, and we still don't, and they show us scenes of her using weapons in matches? Can you imagine that? That's like being a gladiator. Like, guys, keep this in mind. And London was such a different timeline, even 100 years later. But guys, keep this in mind, guys. During when John L. Sullivan was champion during the 1880s and late 1880s, back then fans, guys, spectators and fans back then never paid money in brawl fights in outside arenas. Because, guys, keep this in mind. The Jay Kilrain and John L. Sullivan fight, which I will talk about that next week, had all fans, all men with top hats. Is it possible that there were some women in the attendance? Who knows? Back then, guys, even during the old days, boxing was really hard at the time. And until during the end of World War II is when they finally said they had women and spectators finally being there for the first time. But it's kind of weird because women were not... Guys, American women and British women might have been a lot different than they were in each generation of the time. So if you're from America back in the day and you just start seeing a lot of spectators that were men, that was common back then. Guys, if you had to go to parties where you go to a party and you have a group of women on one side and a group of men on the other side, and they're all dancing on their own genders, that was a common thing back then. It really was. But then you go to Great Britain and you see a woman named Elizabeth Wilkinson fighting against a fishwife named Martha Jones, and they're fighting for over 22 minutes, beating each other with bare knuckles. It makes you wonder, during the 18th century, I don't know much about the 19th century or the 18th century of America as much as I should. It's really different back then when it was. Believe me. And guys, America in the 1700s was barely states. States were barely in the Northeast, with Indians occupying the Northwest and the regions of Texas and other areas. And the Old West was never a thing yet. So America was barely on its climax because guys, 1776 is just about 50 years in the future at this time, during 1726, during the time when she was boxing. So during her time in 1722 and her career in 1733. So states were there were not even 50 states at the time. During the 1800s, there might have been maybe 20 or 30 states until 1960s, when Alaska and Hawaii became the 49th and 50th state. And that was it. And I think the 48th state, I forgot what the 48th state was. When was the 48th state again? I gotta look up the 48th state. When was the 48th state? The 48th state was Arizona. And that was back in, became in February the 14th, 1912. The 48th state, man. In 1959 was the 49th state for Alaska. And of course, a couple years later, of course, around that time is when Hawaii became the 50th, man. Yeah, Arizona, man. I would have failed history if I actually didn't know that. But yeah, my point is, guys, back then was so different from timelines that they're so different in today's world that even the 18th, guys, I think in the 1800s is when women's bare knuckle in British might have came to an end, but I would have to look up more information about that as time goes on, as I'm moving forward to this series. Because it's kind of interesting when you look at the first ever bare knuckle boxing in women's history, and it's ridiculous. Because, guys, 2018 during BKFC American Bare Knuckle did their first host of two females boxing each other in a major event in America. But the thing was, 1722, 1819, damn, that's like, wow, 296 years. 296 years from 2018 to 1722 when we had this. It took 296 years for women in America, or even, well, the woman that won the match was from Australia, but still, in America, as American bare knuckle boxing, sporting a major sport in women, that's kind of ridiculous, but shocking at least. Guys, I could talk about this all day I want to, because this is interesting history to talk about. I don't know what to say about this. But by the way, guys, you know what's even more crazy about this? Because like I said before, because Elizabeth Wilkinson had skills using daggers, short swords, and quarter staffs. And like I said before, a majority of her matches, which says on Wikipedia, says that she was fighting with weapons. But you know what's crazy? At the time, it was common for women to fight topless. And by the way, guys, speaking about topless, if you had to look up the first ever of sumo wrestling in women sumo wrestling at the time, it's completely different than it is. Now, in today's world, guys, women in sumo wrestling, women get to wear tight pants and tight other stuff to not be exposing their buttock regions without other stuff. And in men's sumo wrestling, it's completely different when you have it the complete opposite. And believe me, that's the truth, because that's what it was back then. Back then was that different than it is in today's world. Like, I really don't know what to say. But here's the thing. It was so different when sumo wrestling, and guys, I know I'm supposed to be talking about bare knuckle fighting, but sumo wrestling almost has similarities, because, guys, the first ever, when looking up sumo wrestling in women's sumo wrestling, and I did look this up like a couple years ago, where it stated on Wikipedia here on sumo about women in sumo, says that women are not allowed to compete in professional sumo. They are also not allowed to enter the wrestling ring, a tradition stemming from Shinto and Buddhist believes that women are impure because of menstrual blood. Well, that's kind of rare to, guys, that's kind of rare to actually say that, considering in professional wrestling, from New Japan Wrestling or All Japan Wrestling or even the FMW, you have women bleeding like a stuffed pig. Guys, even Japanese women back in the 80s and some in the 90s or so, during the time when wrestling in America, from professional wrestling of WWF and such, back then, American women were not all that great and such. Even with Rockin' Robin and Sherry Martel being the top prospects, when the fabulous Moolah was already off the contention, other wrestlers and other people from diva wrestlers in the 2000s doing nothing but bikini contests and such were the thing. So you're talking about women in Japan that bleed like a stuffed pig in some matches, because, guys, I have seen some Japanese females in the Japanese wrestling industry of the international of Japan. They bleed hard. That's how disgusting it is. And guys, even Asuka, Japanese WWE wrestler Asuka, which Asuka, I think her name is, or Asuka they call, but it's her name is Asuka. She once fought against a male wrestler in her country in a tag match, and that male wrestler beat the living crap out of her, and she bled hardcore. It's crazy that she recovered a few years from that injury just to go to WWE and to be the top prospect. And I don't know what to say about that. And you're telling me that for Shinto and Buddhist beliefs that women are impure of menstrual blood? Like, I'm not saying that Japanese women are weak. Like, yeah, you can say that it is a little bit weird because, like, Japanese women and another Asian culture are different from what their attitudes are, because it is interesting from what we are, just like British people and American people back in the day. Like, women weren't allowed to become boxers at the time, and even when there was some boxing footage or even boxing um stuff or archives back in the day, it was hard to understand that. So I can understand that, but still, it's so ridiculous. And by the way, guys, the history does say that the first ever sumo wrestling ever recorded instance of women performing sumo was, according to a Nihon Shoki, is when the emperor of Uriyaku in 418 to 479 AD summoned two courtesans and ordered them to wear loincloths and sumo wrestle. There is also a picture of there's also a picture on the Wikipedia that shows women sumo wrestling with the sumo garments that they wear of the underwear type, with being topless, which makes that even more crazy. Just like this, that was like 400 AD, and this is 17 AD is what we're here talking about boxing. That's just ridiculous to talk about this. They fight topless. And it also says here on Elizabeth Wilkins's resume here, saying that even when they fight topless, they Thrasher suggests that Wilkinson and her opponents define themselves as serious athletes by fighting fully clothed, with one advertisement from 1726 stating that the boxers would fight in cloth jackets, short petticoats coming just below the knee, Holland drawers, white stockings, and pumps. So back in those days, if you look up what those things were back then, of what wardrobes were back then it's kind of ridiculous. And I'm not going to explain it because we're almost at the 30-minute mark of this podcast, and I got to end this until 35 minutes because I keep forgetting it's not the podcast I'm talking about. So I got to keep that in mind. So, but guys, here's some other articles they talked about. Even though she became a fixture in boxing of the James Figg, where both Figg and Wilkins were skilled self-promoters, and Wilkinson frequently engaged in trash talk in her printed challenges, which is something for a pioneer to do. Like, for example, Wilkinson once published acceptance of a challenge from Ann Field, an ass driver from Stoke Newington. And she declared that the blows which I shall present her with will be more difficult for her to digest than any she ever gave her asses. By 1726, Wilkinson also frequently fought by James Stokes' boxing amphitheater. Now, there is other history here, like in October in London, the newspaper announced a fight between Wilkinson and Mary Welch, an Irish boxer, to take place at James Stokes Amphitheater. And the announcement of Welch described Wilkinson as the famous championess of England. And in her response, Wilkinson claimed to be undefeated, having never engaged with any of my own sex, but I always came off with victory and applause. In advertisements for other fights, she was variously billed as the Invincible City Championess, the European Championess, and the Cockney Championess, and Britannia's most persistent heroine. And even though, like I said before, there is no definite record of Wilkinson's wins and losses exist during the time, and depending on who you say is telling the truth, but yeah. And then the final article says here, later in her career, Wilkinson and her husband were often challenged by a pair of mixed gender couples, as said before, with her fighting the woman and him, the man. In the first of these, her former opponent, Mary Welch, and her trainer, Robert Baker, challenged Mr. Stokes and his bold Amazonian Virago. Interesting name. In July 1727, Thomas and Sarah Barrett gave a similar challenge in December 1728. In his response, James Stokes noted that Elizabeth was thought not to fight in public anymore, but my spouse, not doubting, but to do the fame and hopes to give a general satisfaction to all spectators. Though she exclusively boxed against other women, one advertisement from 1733 suggests that she may have fought a fencing match against Edward Sutton, who was also a frequent combatant in London prize rings. Okay. And that's 1733. Keep that in mind. So this was during the end when she disappeared entirely. Because this is what the last two paragraphs says here. In addition to fighting, Wilkinson instructed aspiring pugilists an announcement for one of Wilkinson's fights, noted that two of her students would fight 6 rounds with quarterstaffs interspersed among the bouts between Wilkinson and her opponent. Can't say much about that. Am I right? No, I can't be right about that. I might be 100% wrong. Wrong. And then the last paragraph says here, Wilkinson continued to appear in boxing announcements until at least 1733, but which point she claimed to have fought 45 matches and gone undefeated. She disappeared from the historical record after her last advertised fight. So my last question about this is, what do we have to say about her career? Well, there was a Melissa Smith in women's boxing, according where they went against middle and upper class attitude during Wilkinson's career, where according to Jenkins, Wilkinson's career appears to have been successful even though she defined 18th century gender roles. She was celebrated in the skilled boxing into the early 1800s, earning praises from sports writer Pierce Egan and, like I said, from the 1813 book of Boxiana, and the early of 19th century of James Peller Malcolm and Thomas More, as said before, referred Wilkinson in a positive light, even with her trash talk. And the Thrasher was found that the reference of Wilkinson became increasingly rare and negative later in her 19th century, where they argues that the Victorian era saw a strict redefinition of gender roles. So some writers that thought portrayed Wilkinson as a historical curiosity, while others desired her and her compatriots as evidencing as the barbarism and morale fallings of the 18th century. So take that for what you will. But guys, the timeline in women's sports is so different. I think we can already tell that not all women back then were different. Other than they're not all the same. Because all of us think that back in those days, women were doing nothing but cleaning, fixing out, doing this or that. They were not involved in politician or voting. But back in these days, this type of stuff, just like Japanese sumo wrestling and this, is what makes this an interesting sport. And that is all I have to say about this. And we're already at the 35-minute mark, so thank you, viewers, for watching this episode. And as always, we'll see you next week to talk about John L. Sullivan. Bye-bye.